Welcome to Untold Black Legend. Imagine being 19 years old, freshly bathed, dressed in silk that doesn't belong to you. You were told you had been selected. You were told it was a privilege. No one mentioned that leaving would not be an option. The palace halls feel unnaturally still. No footsteps, no voices, silence heavy enough to press against your chest. An attendant smooths your robe. Another corrects the angle of your head. Your name is requested. Not to be remembered, but to be stripped away. Somewhere beyond a curtain, you hear it. Measured breathing, calm, controlled, absolute. You haven't seen her yet, but already you know. This is not a routine court summons. There will be no questions, no refusal. Soon you'll understand why you were chosen, why consent was never part of the process, and why this moment has nothing to do with intimacy. This was not rumor. This was not slander spread by enemies. This was governance. And the figure waiting behind the screen was not an emperor. Her name was Wu Zetian. What she constructed within the Forbidden City disturbed generations so deeply that history chose an easier solution: erase the men involved and recast her as a villain. Their names vanished first. Her reputation was destroyed next. But this story does not begin with indulgence. It begins with a child. Before we go further, if you're drawn to the hidden, uncomfortable truths of history, subscribe to Grim History, leave a like, and when the moment that chills you most arrives, comment where you're watching from. The year was 624, at the height of the Tang dynasty. In a world built to exclude women, a girl was born into limitation. She was not of royal blood. She was not destined for a throne. She was Wu, daughter of a prosperous timber merchant from Sichuan, a region where women were expected to remain unheard, their ambitions swallowed by mountains and tradition. While sons prepared for examinations and official posts, Wu studied in silence. She read forbidden texts by lamplight. She memorized poetry, philosophy, and statecraft, not for pleasure but for protection. History was her weapon, language her armor. By 14, she already understood a dangerous truth. In a world that denied women power, knowledge was the only force sharp enough to carve a future. And this was only the beginning. That same year, her fate was sealed. An imperial order summoned her to the palace as a secondary concubine to Emperor Tong. Music, it was called an honor. In truth, it was confinement dressed as privilege. The palace was not a home, it was a machine. Hundreds of women waited their entire lives for music, a single glance. Most were never noticed. Most disappeared quietly. Wu did music not wait. She watched, she listened. She studied power the way others studied embroidery. While hands stitched silk, she stitched exits in her mind. She learned the language of silence. Music, the meaning behind bows. The weight carried by a glance held too long. Tong barely saw her. Years passed untouched. Then, as tradition, music demanded, the emperor died. By custom, Wu's life should have ended with him. As a former concubine, she was sent to a Buddhist convent. Silence, seclusion, erasure, but oblivion never came. At 26, music, when she should have faded into anonymity, Wu returned to the palace, not as a shadow but as fire. Against every rule, she became consort music to Gaozong, the new emperor and son of the man who once owned her fate. It was more than taboo. It was unprecedented. Music history never fully explains how she came back. A secret summons, music hidden alliances, perfect timing. What is certain is this: Wetan never left anything music to chance. Once inside again, she moved quickly. Rivals vanished. The empress was demoted. Others were silenced or sent away. No public bloodshed, only absences that piled up like fallen leaves. When Gaozong grew ill, Wu became his voice. She issued decrees, met diplomats, delivered judgments. The empire already obeyed her. Only the title music remained. In the year 690, she dropped the disguise. Wu Zetian declared herself Empress Music of China, not regent, not co-ruler, but sole sovereign. She founded her own dynasty and ruled for music nearly 2 decades. The Confucian order shuddered. Scholars quoted texts that no longer applied. Because Wu Zetian was not a flaw in the system, she was its inversion. She governed efficiently. She reorganized ministries. She promoted talent over bloodlines. Every document carried her authority. But her most radical mark was left not in law, but in the private chambers of the palace. There, where power had always flowed from emperor to women, Wu Zetian redirected it. Because she understood something no ruler before her dared music to admit. The body had always been a political tool, so she chose a different one. Music Wu Zetian did not do this for pleasure. She did it for control. History would later condemn her with particular fury because nothing unsettles patriarchy more than seeing its own rules reflected back in reverse. What had always been accepted in emperors, vast harems, pleasure palaces, intimacy traded for promotion, became an unforgivable scandal the moment a woman exercised the same power. In history, male desire was politics. Female desire was treated as a crime. By now the throne was secure. The crown was no longer symbolic. Wu Zetian had not simply survived the system, she had hollowed it out and stepped inside alone. But even absolute authority cannot function on decrees alone. Power needs eyes, it needs ears. Music, it needs bodies close enough to sense betrayal before it speaks. The true turning point did not come on battlefields. It came in the perfumed corridors of the palace. Music Wu Zetian did not reform the system. She bent it until it became a weapon. From this decision emerged the Confucian, officially a ceremonial office, unofficially a surveillance machine disguised as intimacy. In practice, it functioned as a state-controlled male harem. The men were not chosen for noble blood or military skill. They were selected by other standards. The firmness of a jaw, the symmetry of a face, the softness, music of a voice, the elegance of hands moving across a jin. Some arrived through ambitious officials who offered their own sons as tokens of music loyalty. Others were found by quiet agents sent across the provinces to locate young men who were compliant, unconnected, and easily erased. Wu Zetian was said to impose strict requirements: untouched youth, flawless skin, intelligence paired with submission. She was not collecting companions, she was assembling instruments. Each man was trained not only in intimacy, but in listening. They learned how to observe without being noticed, how to retention in a room, how to translate sighs, pauses, and music glances into information. To belong to the Kongan was to become the empire's senses wrapped in music silk. The first to rise was Fun Shao, born without title or lineage in a rural village. One day he was noticed by a princess. Soon after he was kneeling beside the imperial bed. To legitimize his presence, music, he was ordained as a Buddhist monk and renamed Shui Huai. Though there was nothing aesthetic about his ascent, he became Wu Zetian's shadow lover, emissary, and enforcer. He commissioned temples, oversaw the construction of the Hall of Light, and received military honors without ever lifting a music sword. He rode imperial horses, he humiliated officials with a smile. He spoke when the empress remained silent, music, but power devours its favorites. Huai grew arrogant. He publicly insulted music deist monks certain of his invincibility. Then he crossed the line. After a dispute with the empress, he set fire to the Hall of Light, the very monument that symbolized her authority. The building burned. So did his protection. He was ambushed and killed, his name erased. His ashes scattered at the White Horse Temple. No epitaph followed. No mourning music was permitted, yet the void he left did not remain empty. After him came Shen Nanchu, the quiet one, not a music politician, not an enforcer, perhaps a musician, perhaps a physician, perhaps a poet. What mattered was what he music did not see. Man's only strategy. The empress did not sleep with men, she slept with information. The city whispered impossible numbers, 3,000 men, music one for each night. But those figures were exaggerations shaped by fear. The truth was more unsettling. Her hair was not indulgence. Music, it was a mirror, and it revealed what power looks like when stripped of gender. Absolute power music never stays still. It swells, hardens, and eventually rots from within like fruit music left too long in the heat. That decay is what finally overtook Wu Zetian's palace. By the early years of the new century, the empress was failing. Her eyes, once sharp enough to silence ministers, now struggled in the dim corridors. The voice that had once frozen armies emerged in broken breaths, weakened by music fever and coughing. The body that had defied an empire was becoming its own prison. Music on the surface, the state still functioned. In truth, what Wu Zetian presided over was no longer a political heart, but a tumor dressed as an administration. Music, the Zhang brothers, had become its vital organs. They were no longer favorites, they were the system. They controlled access, dictated policy, and reshaped authority as if music the throne were a private board game. Wu Zetian had granted them such intimacy that the boundary between her will and theirs blurred beyond recognition. Music. As the empress withered, they flourished. Their youth stood out brutally among the aging court. Their silk robes, polished skin, and graceful movements at banquets contrasted sharply with the severity of the old aristocracy. Beauty itself became a badge of authority, and that made them intolerable. The palace Muzi. Sea began to turn on itself. Rumors sharpened into weapons. Whispers spoke of rituals disguised music as excess, of shared bars, of imported perfumes meant to mask music decay, not only of the empress's body but of the entire regime. Each story fed the same conclusion. Something had gone too far. Wheaton clung to the throne as the nights grew longer. Sleep abandoned her. She was guarded by eunuchs who no longer knew whether they served a ruler or a specter. Her hand shook as she signed decrees. Her memory faltered, but music, her will, even in decline, remained intact, and that frightened her enemies more than her strength ever had. Powerful women are tolerated only if they fade quietly. Wu Zetian refused. She did not surrender. She did not step aside. She chose to die an empress, and for that, history punished her. Not with steel, but with poison. The poison of ridicule, distortion, and rewritten memory. While her body weakened, the Zhang brothers ruled from the illuminated shadows. One handled foreign envoys with measured smiles. The other oversaw the Confucian, now operating as a state within the state. No appointment, no execution, no message escaped their review. Some officials broke under the pressure. Some took their own lives. Music others attempted escape. None succeeded. The surveillance network Wu Zetian had created had turned inward. The harem, once her sharpest weapon, became her cage. She no longer walked. She was carried through the palace in a golden litter, veiled in perfumed curtains that barely concealed the stench of decay. Her fingers swelled. Her skin grayed. Only the Zhang brothers were permitted to touch her. Only they received her words. That exclusivity sustained their power and sealed her fate. Court life became unbearable. Every banquet, every audience, every silence felt loaded. Suspicion music thickened the air. Betrayal no longer whispered. It waited. Quietly a coalition formed. Senior officials, music veteran generals, scholars who had once bowed to her authority. They did not shout. They did not rally crowds. They planned an ending. The coup came without spectacle. One morning, the palace gates simply stayed closed. Corridors stood empty. Musicians' music did not play. Eunuchs looked away. At the center of the stillness, Wu Zetian, wrapped in music's silken fever, understood what power could not prevent. Loyalty cannot survive on fear alone. Fear, like all living things, eventually music dies. The winter of 705 arrived without snow, but heavy with iron. The palace music awoke to the sound of armored footsteps scraping stone. No horns announced the change. History simply shifted. Doors once opened to the Zhang brothers were sealed. Servants avoided their eyes. Music. Everyone understood this was not a surprise. It was a conclusion. The brothers were seized at dawn, still in their night robes. One attempted music negotiation. The other begged. There were no trials, no formal charges. The verdict came immediately. They were executed in the inner gardens. Their heads were music displayed at the northern gate where foreign envoys had once passed. The message was unmistakable. The body that had seized the throne would be purged with blood and spectacle. Wu Zetian was awakened music by strangers, not familiar voices, not loyal faces. Her body resisted movement. Fever burned through her. Still, she understood. The throne had abandoned her before her body did. She was forced to abdicate, not by swords or chains, but by documents, seals, and hollow ceremonial words spoken by music men who had once trembled before her. The decree was sealed with her numb hand. Music black ink stained her fingernail. No one wiped it away. When an emperor falls, his enemies often grant him tragedy. When an empress falls, they turn her into a monster. Overthrow is never enough. Her ambition must become madness. Music, her desire, must be reframed as disease. Her legacy must be reduced to scandal. Wheaton was moved to a secondary palace, not officially imprisoned, but rendered invisible. She received no reports, issued no decrees, saw nothing beyond walls and unfamiliar servants. She died soon after. The exact date was never carefully recorded. There was no public mourning, no imperial procession. Only a modest burial followed music by something far more thorough than death. Erasure. Official records were edited. The names of her consorts were removed. The Kongan was dissolved. Her decrees were annulled or reassigned. In Confucian texts, she became a warning. In poetry, a distortion. In folklore, a witch. Yet censorship is never complete. Some chroniclers left fragments behind. Notes, music in margins, details too precise to invent. Titles she granted. Laws she reformed. Music officials she promoted for merit rather than blood. Traces of a ruler who governed as men had always done, but paid music a price none of them ever faced. After her fall, the restored Tang dynasty poured resources into reshaping her memory. They could not erase her existence, so they disfigured it. She became the empress of 3,000 music lovers, a grotesque figure who discarded men as easily as decrees, a heretic who placed her bed above the law. These images were repeated until they hardened into doctrine, and with each repetition, the complexity vanished. The strategy behind intimacy disappeared because the truth was more threatening than any myth. Wu Zetian was not destroyed by excess, she was destroyed by clarity. Her body died, but her memory was sentenced to a slower execution, selective forgetting, deliberate distortion, a narrative poisoned at its source. For centuries, official chronicles dragged her name through ridicule. Her greatest strength was never debated. Her ability to govern alone, to command a sprawling empire without a king beside her, was simply erased. Instead, history clung to a single charge, that she transformed the court into something obscene. This was not an accident, it was strategy. Confucian chroniclers mastered a quiet form of violence, revision. Every relationship was inflated into scandal. Every alliance was rewritten as lust. The Gongan, once a formal institution of the state, was later rebranded as an official brothel. Men who negotiated treaties, managed provinces, and wrote policy were stripped of intellect and reduced to indulgences. Yet none of these stories exist in the original imperial records. They appear later, precisely when male authority needed defending. Her legacy was reshaped into a cautionary tale. Because when a woman rules successfully, she cannot simply be wrong, she must be dangerous. Notice the pattern. In retellings, the powerful woman always ends the same way: isolated, aging, despised. Meanwhile, male excess is reframed as tradition. An emperor's harem signals strength, continuity, legitimacy. Female desire, however, is labeled decay. When she mirrored male rulers, history didn't call it governance, it called it moral disease. The men associated with her were erased with surgical care. No descendants, no honored surnames, no surviving portraits, tombs defaced, names cut from genealogies as if deletion itself could restore balance. Their absence wasn't neglect, it was intention. And that silence speaks louder than any inscription. Every historical omission is a confession. Every biography that reduces her reign to scandal reveals more about the authors than about the empress. She wasn't feared because she reversed gender roles. She was feared because she proved they were unnecessary. A woman who desired without permission, who used relationships as tools of statecraft, who ruled without surrendering control of her private life. For that, she wasn't punished for incompetence or cruelty, but for demonstrating that power itself has no gender. History does. Her tomb still stands in Luoyang. No titles, no praise, no condemnation, just stone and deliberate emptiness. Beneath it lies one of Imperial China's most unsettling truths. A woman ruled as effectively as any man, and what followed was not decadence, but reflection. For centuries, we were taught to admire emperors for their excesses and fear empresses for the same acts. We were told she was dangerous because she desired too much, never that the men before her were celebrated for identical behavior. What was forbidden was never desire, it was comparison, and telling these stories matters. Because every time a buried truth is spoken, the official narrative cracks. History trembles, not because it's weak, but because it was never complete. So now I'll ask you, was Wu Zetian a tyrant, or a mirror male power refused to face? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy uncovering the stories history tried to silence, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications. Because the past isn't finished speaking, and we're just getting started.